So, moving on to item 6B, which is the second application tonight, which is the Bletchley Landfill site. Could we have the officer's introduction, please, Katie, when you are ready?
Thank you, Chair. Just a short update to draw members' attention to the papers which were circulated yesterday. These papers contain some additional information provided by the Environment Agency relating to the submitted complaints that they had received regarding the landfill site over the last few years. The Environment Agency also provided some further information regarding possible restoration works of the landfill and some general advice about their view on that. And there was also a further document submitted by the operator just raising some concerns regarding the content and recommendation of the officer report. Just to move to the presentation, if I can please, John. There's just a few slides just to give some context as to the location of the landfill. First slide, please, John. Thank you. So this slide just provides a bit more general context to the landfill and the wider area. So it shows the sort of residential areas surrounding the landfill site of parts of Far Bletchley, West Bletchley, but also Newton Longville and beyond, and also further residential areas beyond, such as Tattenhoe and Emerson Valley. Next slide, please, John. Thank you. This just gives a more detailed site outline of the landfill operation, so you can see in the context of the nearby residential areas, notably Newton Lees and Bletchley. Thank you, John. Next slide. This plan shows restoration master plan, so it's been provided by the applicant and demonstrates the longer term restoration works which they are seeking to vary in terms of the timing of that. But again, it just gives you an indicative layout as to what the restoration works would appear to be. Next slide, please, John. This is it's an OS plan, but it just demonstrates the extent of the closest properties within Newton Lees. So if you can see at the bottom of the screen, it's Galapagos Grove, which is there marked out. That's the sort of closest properties to the very southern part of the landfill site, which is the sort of dark grey shaded area. So it's just to give a context as to sort of the relationship between the two, just so that members can sort of get an idea as to the actual the relationship and the distances between the two. Next slide, please, John. This just provides a similar layout, but just as an aerial photograph. The date of this is from a few years ago, so it is a little bit out of date in terms of what's been constructed. But again, it just shows Galapagos Grove again at the sort of the middle section here, just above where it says the Ascension Gardens. You can just see where the residential properties of Newton Lees are, and then just to the north of that you can see the landfill extent beyond that. So again, it's just giving you a context as to the two uses together. And the last slide, please, John. Thank you. And again, that just shows you the location plan, and that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, so we have 5 objectors to the application. Each will have 3 minutes, and I'll call them in the order that I have on my speaking list. So do we have Mr. Hume?
Yes, I'm here.
Good evening. You have 3 minutes, and I'll give you a little nudge when you've got 30 seconds left. Just state who you are and if you represent any organisation at the start, and when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Councillor Ed Hume, a councillor for Bletchley and Penny Stratford Town Council. And just to be clear, I'm not speaking on behalf of the Town Council this evening. Delia Shepherd will be doing that shortly. I'll be speaking as a councillor, primarily representing the Lakes Estate, but also as a resident in the local community. The timing of this application was extremely unfortunate. The week before the full lockdown was implemented by the government. This has meant it has not been possible to engage with the community in a large way as we would do normally. And I know the developer, as far as I'm aware, the developer has made no efforts to engage with the community widely apart from replying to the responses to the application from local residents. Despite all this, the community have made their voices heard, especially Newton Lees. They've demonstrated by the large number of objections to the application that this landfill site is not suitable. It is a shame that decision could not be taken in the chamber, and I would have expected a packed gallery this evening. I welcome the officer's report, which recommends that the application is rejected. The officer's report details the effects the landfill has on the local community, especially Newton Lees. I would urge members of the DCC to follow this recommendation. The landfill was due to close in 2022, and many people bought homes based on that advice, knowing that there would be a short-term impact because of the landfill, and the long-term impact not being there because the landfill would be closed. However, there are also residents in the Lakes Estate and on the Poets Estate in Bletchley who've had to deal with the impacts of this landfill site for much, much longer than residents of Newton Lees, and another 15 years will have a devastating impact on those communities. The smell, the flies, the lorries. I'm disappointed with the highways part of the officer's report. It completely misses the impact of lorries being parked up for hours on end along Jersey Drive, a road not yet adopted by the council, but an important road for the Newton Lees, connecting the north of the estate with the main roads and connecting the wider community with the Newton Lees Pavilion, the football pitches, the care home and the shops. These lorries present a hazard, especially when turning out of the shops. If DCC are minded to approve this application, which I hope they are not, it is vital that conditions are imposed to ensure that lorries are not able to park on Jersey Drive, and that conditions should be placed that facilities should be provided on site for lorry drivers. I would urge the community to reject this application on the basis of the officer's report and the detrimental long-term impact the extension of the landfill site will have on the community. I also want to praise the community for making their voices heard on this application in the large number of objections. Thank you for your time today, Chair.
Thank you for that. Okay, next I have Mr. Kelly Wilson.
Hello, Chair.
Good evening. Introduce yourself and if you represent any organisation, and then you've got 3 minutes and I'll give you a nudge at 30 seconds left when you're ready.
Hi there, I'm Ethan Kelly Wilson, Vice Chair of Newton Lees Residents Association, and I'm also a Town Councillor at Bletchley and Fen Stratford Town Council, representing Newton Lees. I'm here to represent the residents and their objections against the landfill. I live here in Newton Lees, I have done for the last 7 years, and like many others, I knew the site was there, but I decided I could live with it because in a few years it would be a fantastic country park and an extension to the Blue Lagoon. The officers at MKC have provided a very comprehensive planning report and also a strategy for waste. MKC sends very little to landfill, and by 2022 it will not need to rely on this site. So Bletchley will simply become an importer of waste. When thinking of Bletchley, many want to think of the home of the code breakers, the home of computing, and right at the centre of the east-west rail link, not a place which imports rubbish from miles away. FCC say that this site is of strategic importance to MK. However, my belief is that this site is strategically important to them because in February this year, they started a £188 million contract for waste in central Bedfordshire until 2028 and ultimately extendable to 2036. So they're being paid for collecting rubbish in central beds, which they can then landfill in their own facility. According to published figures, central Bedfordshire sent Bletchley 12 times the amount of waste that MK did last year. Here in Milton Keynes, we've got great plans to be the greenest city, to increase biodiversity and tackle climate change. As long as FCC Bletchley remains open, there could be up to 250 daily vehicle movements coming from Beds, Herts and North London to come and dump rubbish here. Does that fit in with our council policies and plans? It absolutely does not. There is a lot of development planned in the south of the city as part of Plan MK. When we have all these new residents, where are they going to go to relax? What recreation land are they going to have? We need this land remediated now so our citizens can use it, and it would be an amazing extension to the Blue Lagoon. My son is 7, and I, like many parents of Newton Lees, want him to be able to use that fantastic community facility while he is young, to learn to look after it as a vital resource in his community. If we allow this extension, my son will be 26 and I will be close to retirement. The applicant states that they've consulted locally via their liaison committee. I saw 6 people were invited. When I, as a councillor, asked for info, the site's compliance advisor, rather than engage me, told me it would go to planning soon and you can get info from public access. 8 years ago, when we were discussing a planned wind turbine, they had a meeting on the Lakes estate attended by 55 people. So it seems that their consultation style is very different now.
30 seconds.
They say that it's a very well-managed site. Jersey Drive has become a de facto lorry overnight stop as a result of this site. We fix no problems in Milton Keynes if we allow this extension, but we cause further problems for Milton Keynes if we allow the extension to go ahead. And I would ask you all to vote against this application this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, do I have Ms Shepherd now?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee. I'm Delia Shepherd. I'm the Town Clerk for Bletchley and Fenny Stratford Town Council, and my members have asked me to speak on their behalf tonight. My council objects strongly to this application and respectfully urges the committee to follow the case officer's recommendation for refusal. As the report makes clear, there are very good planning grounds for rejecting this 15-year extension. Although there may be need for continued landfill facilities at regional level, the need for these facilities at local level is now diminishing. So the regional benefit of any extension must be weighed against the considerable disbenefits and negative impacts of the site on the local community. I'm here really to emphasise the Town Council's strength of feeling on these negative local impacts. The Town Council believes that continuing the current detrimental effects on the local environment, on residential amenity, on highways and biodiversity simply can't be justified for another 15 years. The scale of public representations which are reflected in the report and the common themes which these representations have picked up, such as vile odours, infestations and very poor air quality, vividly illustrate the impact of this operation on the ordinary enjoyment of everyday life for residents in Newton Lees. And the residents in Newton Lees are not the only people who are affected. With new housing planned on the lakes and new building already happening at Eton Lees, the health and well-being of future residents must also be considered. Notwithstanding the comments from Milton Keynes Highways, the Town Council stands by its serious concerns about traffic movement from HGVs, including the queuing and parking on Jersey Drive, which has been alluded to by other speakers. So we say, please listen to the community and your officer and reject this application, which we say is contrary to Plan MK and the Council's own stated commitment to biodiversity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, next objector I have is Councillor Wales. Are you there, Councillor Wales?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. My name is Councillor Elaine Wales and I represent Bletchley Park Ward. I'm also on West Bletchley Parish Council. And just wanted to read this out for you. The landfill site has been part of Bletchley life for more than 30 years now. Residents have always been told that this would close in 2022. I remember growing up during the summer months in Bletchley when I was living on Buckingham Road and when I was living on racecourses. I was not able to sit outside or have any of the windows open as the smell from the landfill site would become unbearable. If this licence extension is granted, it means more of the same for residents of my ward, Bletchley Park, and even worse for the residents of Newton Lees. Local residents should not have to endure any more issues of bad smells or plagues of flies. In Newton Lees, the problem gets so bad during the summer months that they cannot open their windows or leave their doors open as their homes get infested with flies. I also think this application was timed deliberately to be submitted when parish councils and council officers were facing pressures on resources, meaning that parish councils were not given time to hold meetings to discuss the application or consult with local residents. Because less than 1% of Milton Keynes rubbish is sent to landfill, the rubbish is imported to this site from Bedfordshire, from London and the surrounding areas. Why should we be the dumping ground for other cities that do not manage their waste as well as we do? It's not our waste, so why should people have to live next to it? I urge the council to refuse this proposal and to go with the officer's recommendation and to make sure this proposal doesn't go through. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. And finally, we have Councillor Darlington. Are you there, Councillor Darlington?
Yeah, just coming online now. Right. Hello, my name is Councillor Emily Darlington. I am the councillor for Bletchley East. I'm also a cabinet member for the public realm, but I'm not speaking on that behalf today. I'm speaking as the ward councillor representing Newton Lees and the area in which the landfill currently stays. So I just wanted to give some context to the committee because, first of all, when we say 15 years, it may not seem that long, but what we're talking about is having a landfill until 2037. And that's really quite a considerable amount of time. And it goes contrary not just to Milton Keynes Council's objectives of being the greenest city and what we've laid out both in the council plan, which is number 66, which says that we oppose this, but also against our sustainability strategy and our sustainability action plan and the considerable amount of investment that we've made as a city to make sure that we take care of our waste, which means that by 2022, we have plans in place to make sure that none of our waste goes to landfill. And in fact, that is in line with exactly what the government is saying should be done. Now, it's a shame that some of the neighbouring councils have not done the same thing, but they are under pressure from government to take similar measures to ourselves in making sure that we deal effectively with waste, both increasing our recycling and dealing with the waste that we do create. And of course, as you know, the European directives are all in the same direction as well. Now, that's partly what's caused this problem, is the fact that the landfill is not full. So while they say, oh, well, it will be full in another 15 years' time, if other councils take our actions, it still won't be. And they'll come back again and again and again. As we know, they've already come and asked for an extension, and we've already rejected it in the past. And it was rejected previously because the operational period of the landfill was viewed, because at that time, insufficient evidence to conclude that there will not be enough waste generated within Milton Keynes and its immediate surroundings to enable the site to be completed by the date approved. We're in exactly the same situation now, and I would urge the committee to take the same decision that was made previously. Just to echo some of the sentiments that have been raised by some of the speakers, but also raised with me by the residents. The actual impact of this site goes, the release of methane gas has a huge contribution to our climate change within our country and our city. It's one of the activities that contributes the most to climate change. And as you know, we have a strong commitment against that, and it is something supported by our residents. But also
30 seconds.
Sorry, I'll just say the one last thing is the playing fields and the pavilion are next to the landfill site, and you'll have seen that on the map. The reason they were built there was because the site would be closing. Are we to have the football fields continually closed so that until 2037, not leaving playing fields for this community? Or will they be forced to play next to rubbish that has been imported from North London? I don't think that's right, and I urge the committee to refuse this application.
Thank you, Councillor Darlington. Okay, so that's our 5 objectors. We have an agent for the applicant, Mr. Nicholson. Are you there, Mr. Nicholson?
Yes, hello, good evening, Chair.
Okay, so you have up to 15 minutes. If you require it, please don't feel like you have to fill the 15 minutes. And I'll give you a nudge when you've got about a minute left. When you're ready.
Yes, of course, thank you. Good evening, members of the committee. I'm Matt Nicholson. I'm the Estates Manager for FCC, and I'm here to speak on behalf of FCC in support of the Section 73 application that we submitted to extend the operational life of the site. As the applicant, we have some concerns over the manner in which some of the information has been presented within the committee report, and that some of those details have been presented in a manner as to not necessarily give the full picture, and certainly the comments from the officer earlier regarding the recent comments from the Environment Agency is not a true reflection of what those comments actually said. I will seek to try and address some of these points through this statement, which I shall just read for you now. So as has been set out in the committee report, the site is a former clay extraction, and it's been in operation as a landfill since the 1970s. The landfilling of the void having been consented as a means of restoring that site to a beneficial after use, and that work is obviously clearly still ongoing. The site is a non-hazardous landfill, and it's regulated by the Environment Agency, and it employs 15 staff who manage site operations in accordance with its environmental permit. The site provides a strategically important disposal point for predominantly construction and demolition and commercial and industrial waste from local and regional sources. I must emphasise that point. These wastes are not primarily municipal. FCC conducts site operations in an open manner and in accordance with the site permit, and proactively responds to any complaints and issues that are raised. There are regular local liaison meetings, and our site team are available to be contacted at any time. It's worth noting that FCC Environment supports the Landfill Tax Fund initiative, with 10% of all the landfill tax takings from active sites being returned to the community via the FCC Community Foundation, which has supported a vast range of community projects in the area, and more recently with a £1 million grant to the Bletchley Park Museum and Heritage Site. The operation of the site predates the development of the neighbouring residential areas within Newton Lees, and consent for this development was granted with full knowledge of the existence of the landfill site. It should be noted that the previous site owner, Shanks Waste Management, objected to the residential development on the basis of incompatibility and proximity to a safeguarded strategic waste site. However, despite the objection, the authority granted consent, having satisfied itself that a condition restricting residential development in close proximity to the landfill was sufficient to minimise the intrusion to an acceptable level. Under the adopted Milton Keynes Waste Development Plan, which covers the period 2007 to 2026, the site is a safeguarded strategic waste management facility at a local and regional level, and is supported under policy WA2 of the Waste Development Plan. Furthermore, and as confirmed within section 7.2 of the committee report, the Waste Development Plan acknowledges that the life of the landfill is likely to need to be extended beyond the site's current planning end date and the end of the development plan period. The need for additional operational time to complete the restoration to consented contours is entirely due to the impact of government policy intended to divert municipal, industrial and commercial wastes away from landfill. And consequently, a large volume of waste inputs has been lost across all landfill sites, including Bletchley. Whilst this policy has been effective, it did not account for the implications of removing waste volumes from landfills, which already had pre-existing planning consents. This included consented contours and restoration obligations, such as those that we have at Bletchley, and these were conceived and committed to prior to the creation of these policies. Consequently, the reduction in waste inputs means it takes longer to complete final restoration. The committee report makes reference to the South East Waste Planning Advisory Group, or SUPAG, of which Milton Keynes Waste Planning Authority is part, and clearly identifies that SUPAG has reviewed the available landfill capacity across the South East, and that Bletchley Landfill is a strategically important site for the waste arising in the South East, and accounts for a quarter of the remaining landfill void in the region. SUPAG identified that the current landfill void for the South East will be depleted by 2039. This situation would be significantly accelerated if an extension of time is not permitted at Bletchley. It is important to note that whilst inputs of all waste types to landfill have reduced, there is still a need for landfill as a final disposal option, and Bletchley Landfill predominantly accepts commercial and industrial and construction and demolition waste, with only a very small quantity of municipal waste being received. This is around 10% of our total volumes. These wastes are sent for landfill disposal due to a lack of available alternative treatment or disposal options, and in the case of Bletchley, the site provides an important strategic disposal option for these waste types both locally and regionally. The committee report identifies that the current council plan, which sets out the ambitions of the council for the period up to 2022, and that the plan was updated in May, which is after the submission of the planning application, to include a new priority to oppose the extension of Bletchley Landfill site's operational lifetime. The committee report importantly confirms in section 7.48 that the council plan is not part of the development plan and carries no weight in this regard. In our view, the council plan is not material for the decision-making process, and full weight should be given to the previously identified adopted development plan policies. Planning application is seeking an extension of time to 2037, which is 15 years beyond the current end date of the 6th of February 2022. The additional 15 years is based upon forecasted waste inputs and the time these will take to fill the remaining void, which is approximately 10 million cubic metres. Without an extension of time, it would not be possible to complete the landform to its consented contours. And the current topography of the site has a large remaining void adjacent to previously deposited wastes, which, if not completed, will create long-term issues for the management of surface water, leachate and landfill gas. It would also prevent the restoration of a large part of the site for beneficial after-use and compromise FCC's ability to deliver the proposed restoration scheme. The proposed restoration scheme is acknowledged within section 7.52 of the committee report as being positive in its own right and having significant benefits for local amenity, biodiversity, ecology and visual interest. The application included assessment of environmental and amenity impacts, and that included highways, amenity, landscape, ecology and drainage. The relevant statutory consultees have reviewed the submitted application detail and for each aspect do not raise any objections to the proposed extension of operational life. Whilst the committee report briefly mentions the responses from the statutory consultees, we believe that they are not given sufficient or equal weight as other matters discussed in the report. As such, the report is considered to have not weighed the responses appropriately in the decision-making process. In contrast, it appears a greater amount of weight has been afforded to the comments from the Head of Waste and Environment, which sets out the approach to the municipal waste strategy for Milton Keynes. Whilst this provides some context, it should be noted that the Waste Disposal Authority is not a statutory consultee to the application, and the waste strategy for Milton Keynes focuses on municipal waste arisings. Whilst the strategy for Milton Keynes Council may not require long-term use of the landfill, this does not reflect a significant regional need for the facility for other waste streams. Therefore, these comments are not considered material to the determination of the application. It is noted that the committee report identifies the number of local objections received to the application, which broadly relate to alleged amenity impacts from odour, flies and traffic. The scale of this response is not reflected in the number of complaints received. The Environment Agency have raised no objection to the proposal, and Milton Keynes Environmental Health Department have no objection, and confirming their consultee response that since January 2017, they have received 7 complaints and the site is well run with an active community liaison group that is attended by FCC, local residents, the Environment Agency and council officers. Our own experience is broadly similar in that the site typically operates with few complaints, although it is acknowledged that there has been a recent episode of increased complaints to the landfill, and that these peaked in December, which coincided with an operational issue with the gas collection system that has since been corrected. More recently, in the run-up to this planning committee, complaints have been lodged with the Environment Agency regarding odours, prompting investigation by the Environment Agency. The Environment Agency have recently provided further consultee responses, which the officer mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. These are in relation to the application, and they have stated that they have no evidence that the site is causing an amenity impact from odour or flies, and that their inspections and investigations into reports of odour show the site to be well run and operating within the terms of the environmental permit. The Environment Agency have further commented that there are no current pollution or air quality issues associated with the operation of the site. Given the unsubstantiated nature of the complaints and the comments from the Environment Agency alongside our own experience, we believe there is significant disparity between the scale of objections submitted against the application and the reality of substantiated complaints following investigation by the relevant regulatory bodies. FCC do not agree with the reasons for refusal, and the assertion that there would be a negative impact upon amenity and harm to the relative enjoyment of the community as this appears to be an opinion without evidential basis and is entirely at odds with the views of statutory consultees who raise no objections and are the relevant technical experts in their respective fields. Furthermore, the Environment Agency, who are the regulator on such matters, have confirmed they have no evidence that the site is causing any amenity impacts. The statement that the postponement of the restoration works would result in the loss of opportunity for the community to benefit from open space recreation lacks appropriate balance, as it fails to acknowledge that restoration of the site is phased and that to cease landfill operations before completion of the proposed restoration scheme, which is acknowledged within the committee report as being positive in its own right, would have a more negative longer-term impact on both community benefit and FCC's ability to manage surface water and environmental control systems. The suggestion in the committee report that if the application is refused, that the restoration of the landfill will continue and involve the importation of soils and/or unspecified other materials is entirely misconceived and confirmed by the Environment Agency in their recent comments as not being feasible. If the life of the landfill cannot be extended, it will simply not be possible to achieve the previously approved restoration scheme. Furthermore, we wish to draw the committee's attention to the recent consultee comments from the Environment Agency, who, in addition to the points already raised, state that cessation of operations in 2022 would create significant environmental permitting issues and have negative impacts on long-term surface water management, stability, cap and liner integrity, and the effective functioning of environmental control infrastructure. On the basis of the above, we urge the Planning Committee to take into account the supporting planning policy for the strategically important waste facility, the recent comments from the Environment Agency, the support of the statutory consultees who raise no objections, and proceed to approve the application as presented. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so that is all our representations. Does the officer want to pick up any of the points raised from those contributions and clarify any of those before I ask members for questions?
Yes, Chair, I'll just do a very short response, if I may, just to come back on 2 points, really. The comments regarding Environment Agency, were submitted to me this week. They were further comments from the Environment Agency. They weren't a formal response because they had already provided their response. But I was contacted by them because they wished to provide some more clarity on their point of view, which they did. And the main gist of the comments, as I've stated in the update paper, was that they had some concerns regarding the methodology for restoration. And their issue was that backfilling with spoil or other imported materials was going to be more complicated and risky, and that's not something that they would encourage. What I asked for from them was confirmation that restoration work could be carried out in another way, and was there options to do it in another way? And the answer was yes, that there are experts that can come up with a strategy for this. So it is possible and plausible to do it a different way. And that was essentially the conversation that I had with them. So I just wanted to clarify that. And just with regards to the comments around the consultees and their responses and how they have been reported, I think it's important to remember that the case officer is ultimately responsible for making the recommendation. And obviously, of course, they take on board comments from the consultees, but that is also in the balance of the actual role of the officer themselves as well. So it's not purely just based on a consultee comment to result in a recommendation. So I just wanted to clarify. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do any members wish to ask any questions of clarification? Can I emphasise now is the time to ask your questions, so please do ask them if you need to. Councillor Bowyer.
Could I have some clarification from officers on the hierarchy of the various planning documents? I'm thinking particularly of paragraph 7.10, where there's paragraph 3 of the national planning for waste, says that we should consider the need for additional waste management capacity of more than local significance and reflect any requirement for waste management facilities identified nationally. My concern is that does seem to put a duty on us, which I presume is a material consideration, and bearing in mind that this might be appealed at a later date, we need to make sure that we weigh up all of the material considerations and legal practicalities properly at this stage, because as has been pointed out in the report, this facility does provide 25% of the regional capacity, and therefore we need to make sure that we give that adequate weight.
Katie, do you want to?
Yes, yeah. In response to that, the best way to do it is to make reference to section 3 in the committee report, which actually sort of sets out the policy in terms of hierarchy. John, I don't know if you're available just to provide a bit more clarity on that if you're there.
Thank you, Katie. I'd say national plan policy for waste is an important material consideration. Obviously, we as members will be aware, we make decisions in accordance with statutory development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. And national plan policy is a material consideration that members need to be mindful of in obviously considering applications are before them.
Thank you for that. Any other members have any questions?
Just a brief, if I may, Chair, and that's can officers remind us when the existing arrangements were given permission? Was this 15 years ago or 30 years ago or some other period?
I'm just going to check the dates. My recollection is it was 2002.
Yeah, that's
because
what
then
I
it would be
remember.
20 years from 2002, which would take us up to 2022. Sorry.
Thank you.
Can I just clarify something as well? So the original permission from 2002 did that include the details of how the restoration would go? Therefore, that is still in place. You know, how much detail was in the original planning permission about how it should be restored, and how much would that have to be modified later on?
Yeah, so the original permission from 2002, it did include a 12-month period for restoration work. So it was inherent in that original permission that restoration works took place. As you say, I think the reality is, and obviously that's part of what this application is talking about, is that obviously those restoration works have had to have been altered over time. So it's evolved because of circumstances, but it was certainly inherent in the original decision that was issued that it was to be restored.
Okay. Any more members with questions? No? Okay. So I'm going to now propose the officer's recommendation in the report, which is that the permission is refused for the following reason: that the continuation of the existing operation would be unacceptable in terms of negative impact upon amenity of the local community in the longer term. A further 15 years in operation would be harmful to the relative enjoyment of the community. The associated postponement of the restoration works would result in a loss of opportunity for the community to benefit for open space recreation as originally agreed. Can I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Exon. Members would like to contribute to the debate. Councillor Lancaster.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on a few points from the speakers, especially on the smell, I can imagine that the smell actually does travel quite some distance, and not just in the Bletchley East Ward, but the surrounding areas. I mean, it would be useful to create a green corridor of parkland stretching from the Blue Lagoon to Far Bletchley along the south side of the rail line, perhaps. That's obviously a later stage. Well, I feel that would be much better for the residents in all of the Bletchley wards. The houses that are in Newton Leys, it makes sense not to have this on their doorstep, right next door to them. And as Councillor Darlington brought up, if we are trying to do something for the communities that we represent, do we really want a community building with football pitches to be closed because of this happening? In my opinion, no, of course. Landfill, in my opinion, is becoming less needed with recycling going up. Other councils need to be looking at doing different things such as building thermal units and have a low landfill rate like Milton Keynes Council does.
Thank you. Councillor Trendle, I've got you next.
Thank you, Chair. This application will make us an importer of other people's waste. And we'll be doing that, if we approve it, well past 2030, the year in which we have promised and committed to being a carbon neutral city. I don't want to see our roads clogged with unnecessary LGVs, full of other people's waste, blighting the lives of those local people and the local residents down in Bletchley and blighting them well into the future. Approving this would be contrary to all we've said and all we've set out to achieve and all the promises we've made to the people of Milton Keynes. And they will find it hard to take us seriously if we let them down. So I won't support this, and I'm going to encourage my colleagues not to. If London really needs another landfill site, they can start in the garden of number 10, because there's plenty of rubbish that comes out of there and it keeps the haulage distance down. But Milton Keynes isn't anybody's dumping ground, and the sooner this site becomes parkland, as we've promised, the better it is for everybody. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Legg.
Thank you, Chair. I've been a member of this authority and I think this committee for most of that time, since 1996. In the late 90s, early 2000s, the landfill site was actually part of my ward when Denby ward actually included the Saints Estate and the Poets Estate back in them days. And certainly in those times, I can recall one summer, there was a horrendous smell from this landfill site, which caused tremendous issues. There was a local action group called PALS involved. Certainly Rex will remember them, Peter Shine and his friends. And there was a massive amount of issues. The Environment Agency were involved and everything else. Fast forward to 2002, that planning application again, which was controversial at the time. There was a big clamour to try and close the site at that point. However, they were given their time, and we had an end game, and we had a closure date. What this application does, it extends it by 15 years, and it also extends the making good, if you like, by a further 2 years. So we're actually talking about another 17 years here. Just think about that for a second. Another 17 years. And the game changer in all of this was in 2004, the Newton Leys development was given planning permission. There were some safeguards put in at the time to try and minimise the effect on the community. But since probably when the first houses came on stream around 2006 onwards, the residents have had to put up with all the associated issues we've heard. I think tonight, Chair, we need to actually put down a mark and say, we're actually here to represent the residents of Milton Keynes and support the residents of Milton Keynes. I think the report, the planning officer's report, is very clear about the reasons this doesn't conform with policy, and I think the committee just needs to support the residents and support the officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I've got Councillor Petchey, then Councillor Riley.
Thank you, Chair. There is some merit in having a hole in the ground to put things in which need to be disposed of, but this is not the place to do that. It's simply, as everybody has said, we've got Newton Leys right next door to it. We've got no local need for it whatsoever, and indeed national policy supports us in saying that we don't actually really need that many holes in the ground anyway. I'd just like to But rather than going in more detail in points that everybody else has raised, let's raise one particular issue, which the operator made at some length, which was that it was a regional facility. Now, the southeast includes a number of wonderful places like Margate, Tunbridge Wells, East Grinstead, Chichester. These are all in our apparent region, but obviously this hole in the ground is of absolutely no value to those areas. So an argument on the grounds of regional need, we are not serving anything for Tunbridge Wells or East Grinstead. And I really think, therefore, that the regional argument is not an excessively valid one. And we certainly have no local need for it. So I think the recommendation to refuse permission is perfectly sound.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Riley?
Yeah, I guess I am just going to echo what some colleagues have said. I mean, the days of landfill are coming to an end. The reason they want to almost double the life of this site is because the demand for the service it provides is declining. And that, to me, it makes no sense. You know, if it's declining, it will continue to decline, and that decline will accelerate as other authorities and the construction industry and the demolition industry find new ways of dealing with waste that are more sustainable. So it seems to me that there is no future for this site. It is noisome. It causes angst for neighbours, and that really is of no value to us. And I certainly will support the rejection of this application.
Thank you. Councillor Bowyer, then Councillor Bint.
Thank you, Chair. I am also minded to vote to support the recommendation to refuse this. My concern is, as I asked in my question earlier, whether we are meeting our statutory obligations. Councillor Trendall said in his comments that this will make us an importer of other people's waste. Our problem is that it won't make us an importer of other people's waste. We already are an importer of other people's waste. We have this facility, and we have the National Planning Policy for Waste guidelines that say we have to consider the regional requirement. And we also have the planning practice guidelines in 7.11 that say that we have to be aware that continued provision of availability will mean that we may have to commit time extensions. So I'm worried that if we do reject this, we make sure that we have given the necessary weight to those material considerations, because if we don't, then we will put ourselves at risk on an appeal if it should happen.
Thank you. Councillor Bint.
Thank you, Chair. I was much more persuaded by the arguments that we should do what's right for the residents than I was by the argument that we should take our guidance from European diktats. I thought that was a curious way for the cabinet member to appeal to this committee. It seems to me that this area is surrounded by people who have been promised that in 2022 they will have a beautiful leisure amenity. They will have parkland. What we're being told is that that doesn't suit the economics and the profit of the applicant, who is behaving as if the reduced demand for their service should somehow be translated into the residents' problem, as if they have some right to keep this site open beyond the date they actually have a right to keep it open from, simply because they're now touting a service for which local demand has fallen through the floor, no pun intended. It seems to me that actually that's entirely the wrong presumption on their part. The presumption here is that the surrounding people of this area are entitled to the parkland that they were promised. And that's my starting point in this. Do we have a reason why they should be deprived of that parkland in 2022? And I see nothing to persuade me that they should be deprived of that. So that's the amenity that they are contractually entitled to. It was, I thought, not helpful of the applicant to suggest there is no great loss of amenity. There is a huge loss of amenity if those residents don't have the parkland, the remediated scheme that they're contractually entitled to. In line with all the sentiment of my colleagues, I believe that we should refuse permission in line with our officer recommendation because it's right for the residents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bin. Tracy Dark, did I see you indicate?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I just wanted to sort of help members really with their deliberations about the application, because I think it's about the planning balance, and obviously members have been discussing and debating the planning balance very carefully this evening, and Councillor Bowers picked up on the planning policy bit, which is the starting position. Of course, we have to adhere to national policy, but of course that's the first and starting position really for this application tonight. And then we have to say, well, that's all very interesting, and we are considering it in a regional context. And of course, members are very clear, they understand that, and they understand that this is a big hole, it needs to be filled. However, the permission was granted in 2002 for the period to 2022. And there are expectations about how this area was planned and designed. As Councillor Bint said, the residents moved into the area and they expected a country park in 2023 and beyond. And that's now not what's on the table for them, as they moved into an area that was carefully planned. And the infrastructure that is part of the infrastructure for that part of the city. So I think it's really important to understand that the expectation of the residents, but the wider residents, all of us really, in terms of how that area should be developed. Now, we have the application before us tonight that is to 2037, but we could be in 2035 in exactly the same position we are tonight. What is there to say that that's the end of it again? Of course, as landfill gets better and better, the waste reduction is better and better, then the hole stays a hole longer and longer. So there is no clarity around whether we get to the end date anyway, if members were minded to grant permission tonight. And then, of course, there's the other part that we don't have control over the contracts that are taken on by the operator. So they could take on more contracts and it could get busier. So there could be more lorry movements and more impact on residents. And I think then that's the other planning balance, really. It's about residents and their amenities. And it isn't just about smell and flies. It's about all the other wider amenity areas that those residents expected. It's not to have all the lorry movements. It's not to have all the noise and dust and all those things that are attributed to landfill sites like this. So I think, it's really just, it's that balancing exercise that members need to be very clear that they're doing this evening, and to come to the right decision. And obviously, hopefully, they support officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor McLean, did I see you indicate?
You certainly did. Thank you very much, Chair. I'll play a bit of a devil's advocate. I think I can probably guess the outcome of the vote that you'll be taking in a few minutes. But in my ward, the far side of Milton Keynes to where we're talking about tonight, we've gone through a similar exercise, but in a different way. That we're very close to riverbeds in places like Lathbury and Sherrington, and the local minerals plan was adopted by the council, and there's going to be 2 massive mineral extraction holes developed over the next few years, and one's already underway. But the villagers there, they've tried to fight it, and in the end they lost. But their view was, okay, let's get it over and done with. So in some ways, we're part way through what was agreed in 2002 with some amendments afterwards. I'm actually convinced that FCC will appeal this if we reject it tonight. But hopefully they'll still be listening to this. The one way that could overcome it would be to try and accelerate the filling of this hole commercially, and they could still close it in 2022, and maybe then there's a park by 2023, 24. there are lots of ways to, in my opinion, that we could get to the right result. Another option would be that they lose the application tonight, but then submit one for a shorter period of time and do what I've just said. Say, okay, we'll only ask for a 5-year extension, but we'll commercially we'll use that to fill it with waste from other places that may not have such a good track record as we are developing. So I think in balance, there are things that tonight we will make the decision, and I think we will find ourselves debating it again within a year. But I agree with the way the report's been written. It's clear, and also, particularly, I was thank Ethan Kelly Wilson for a very emotive statement of what's happening and representing the Residents Association. So thank you for that, Ethan.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, so I hope everyone's had their chance to contribute now. I've just been told by our legal officers that Councillor Bint, when he was describing a contractual right, is not a material planning consideration. I've just he was quite forceful with his words there. I just thought that I had to just mention that. However, I think, without wanting to repeat too much what people said, I think the strength of feeling is quite clear here. However, we do need to think, as Tracy said, about that planning balance. And you mentioned, Councillor McLean mentioned Mr. Kelly Wilson's contribution. And when we're thinking about this in terms of planning policy and the fact that the impact on the community is unacceptable, I think in balance it is unacceptable. And I think his example, you know, I mean, I've got a son the same age as his, and he said what he said was absolutely spot on. Is that where he lives, he was expected to be able to take his children to that park, which should be being provided within the next few years. And if we approve this, then he'll be 26 by the time he comes on. We're going to take away that amenity and that facility from a whole generation. And when people bought their houses in Newton Lees, when those 1,650 houses in Newton Lees were approved, that was not on the cards. And I think with that in mind, on balance, that is unacceptable negative impact on immunity. So I will also be voting in favour of the officer recommendation. Okay, so with that in mind, let's move to the vote. The proposal is that the permission is refused for the reason set out at section 9 of the report. Could I have your votes, please? Councillor Bint.
For refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Bowyer.
For refusal.
Thank you. I am voting for refusal. Councillor Exon.
For refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Lancaster.
For refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Legg.
For refusal.
Thank you. Councillor McLean.
For refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Petchey.
For.
Councillor Riley.
For refusal.
Councillor Trendall.
For refusal.
And Councillor Wallace.
For refusal.
Okay, that is unanimous. Planning permission is refused for the reason set out in the report. Thank you, everyone. Okay. What time are we on? 9:30. Right. Let's moving on. So, next application 3, item 6C, is the site to the west of 1 London End Lane, Bow Brick Hill. Can I ask Jeremy to give us his introduction when he's ready, please?
Thank you, Chair. Before I start on the presentation, I just want to give a quick update. Yesterday, the applicant's agent submitted further drawings and information in relation to the proposed scheme. Given the lateness of the submission, officers have not had an opportunity to consider the impact the amendments would have on the scheme. The applicants have therefore been advised that the information cannot be accepted as amendments to the proposal under consideration tonight. However, the committee should be aware that the late submission includes information relating to ecological enhancement and landscaping, together with indication of the drainage runs associated with the development.
Details of the drainage system are not provided, nor are details of the stainless steel trellis or the irrigation system to serve the trellis planting that would be provided. The applicant's agent has stated that the council does already have information regarding the sustainable construction criteria that the building achieves. However, officers consider that this is not clear that the information that has been provided relates to the building that has been constructed. Members will have seen from the circulated update papers that I've also received a letter from another local resident raising concerns about the development that has been carried out in relation to the impact upon the adjoining footpaths. And I've advised the committee that these matters are for the right of way officer and are not material planning consideration. The recommendation remains as given in the agenda. Can we go to the presentation now, please, John? Members will remember that this is an item that was considered and deferred at the May meeting to allow further work on some of the issues that were then included in the reasons for refusal in the recommendation. Can we move on to the next slide, please, John? This slide shows the location of the site on the edge of Bow Brick Hill. Can we go on to the next slide, please, John? This indicates the footpaths and bridleways that surround the site, just to give you an idea of some of the things that are referred to in a number of the consultation responses. Next slide, please, John. This is an aerial photograph. This was taken in 2016, so it's not 100% up to date. The site had just begun clearance works when this was taken, but it shows you the context of the wooded area that the site is situated in. Next slide, please, John. My apologies to Councillor Bint. As I feared when you asked me previously, my technical abilities to actually merge these two plans were not up to the job. So what you've got there is the drawing at the top is the front elevation as it appeared in the drawings that were approved at appeal in 2008. So effectively the extant planning permission for the site, and the drawing below is the current elevation in the proposal before you tonight. I apologise that I couldn't overlay them, but I hope that shows them in context. Next slide, please, John. These are new pictures that have been provided as part of the submission since May. The main picture I think that is of interest here is the sort of artist's impression, the larger picture there, which indicates how it's envisaged that planting will both grow up from the ground and grow down from the roof to help break up the bulk of the building. Next slide, please, John. Again, this is the rear elevation of the building. Again, my failure to put one over the other, but the top drawing is the approved scheme. The lower drawing is the current scheme that's before you tonight. Next slide, please, John. These are the side elevations of the elements that protrude. I don't know if you can see in the drawing, the floor plan drawing to the side, you can see there is sort of two elements, one at the top of that floor plan drawing and one to the bottom, which stick out from the main building. You'll see these better in the photographs in a moment. Next slide, please, John. These are the floor plans that are currently proposed. Next slide, please, John. This is a landscaping scheme that has been received since the May DC. As I've said in the report, this is a far more detailed landscaping drawing than we previously received. On the face of it, it deals with a lot of the issues that were raised as concerns previously. However, the landscape officer has raised the issue of we don't actually know how these landscaping proposals work with the drainage system that has been installed at the site, particularly the areas near the front of the site where there is a biomass digester
whether that conflicts with the root systems of the trees. On the face of it, it appears that it does, but we haven't got enough information to be clear on that. Next slide, please, John. This is the approved landscaping scheme. You won't be able to read all the writing, but effectively it's very similar to what is now shown in the proposed drawing you just previously saw. Next slide, please, John. This is the proposed boundary treatment. I think in terms of the May committee, the members at that meeting expressed concerns about the green metal fencing that you can see in the bottom left of that drawing. And there was some concern about how the treatment of the boundary along the footpath shown in the two pictures at the top and top right of the drawing. Next slide, please, John. And this is the approved landscaping drawing. Essentially, that was relying on the existing vegetation that was on the site for most of the boundary treatments on the site. Next slide, please, John. This is a drawing just showing a section through the hill before development began. Next slide, please, John. This is a section showing the development, a section through the hill now with the proposed building shown as the lighter lines in that drawing. Next slide, please, John. And this one shows the approved section through the hill with the house being shown in slightly heavier lines midway through it. Next slide, please, John. These are photographs. This is a photograph as the site as it now looks. This photo is taken in about March. Next slide, please, John. This more clearly shows the front elevation as it now appears. Next slide, please, John. This shows the wing on the right-hand side of the house that I referred to earlier when we were looking at the floor plans. Next slide, please, John. And this shows the wing on the left-hand side of the house sticking out. Next slide, please, John. This is the pond that has been constructed near the front entrance to the site. Next slide, please, John. These are the gate posts that are referred to in my report. I believe members have had a letter from the applicant's agent which is now showing that these have been removed. Unfortunately, I only saw that after I put together this presentation for my colleagues in committee. This slide stayed in there, but I do believe these have now been removed. And there is photographic evidence, I think, that members will have seen in that letter that came round. Next slide, please, John. This is showing when building works were underway, and this shows how part of the hill collapsed, moved, whatever you will, that is referred to in the report. Next slide, please, John. This effectively is taken from the same position, showing how that has now been dealt with on the site. Next slide, please, John. This is a photograph showing the view up the footpath to the right-hand side of the site. This photograph shows an area slightly further up the footpath from the bottom of the hill. This one was taken in February 2015 before development begun. The next slide, please, John.